Okay, a little secret marathon session that should be in every schedule, and it's going to help you so much in that final third of a marathon, at least the final third, if not throughout. If you've ever done a marathon, or if you've ever done a half marathon, and you've seen that people that are not properly prepared, and most people are not properly prepared, and the reason for that is that most people, this long run stops at 20 miles or 22 miles when they're building up to a marathon, and then that 26 miles is always going to be a bit of a shock. What I'd always say is that, for me, it's a mistake. You should be at least running the distance, or you should be at least running the time that you're going to be on your feet. That's really, really important. So if you're trying to run a sub 3 hour 30 marathon, go out and run 3 hours and 30 marathon. Don't have any shock or surprise, and make sure that's 3, 5 weeks, 6 weeks before you run the actual marathon. But make sure you do it so there's no shocks on race day. It will really help you be more robust and more prepared so that you can race the marathon instead of just trying to survive. But one thing people don't do, they'll often do the hill reps, they'll often do the interval session, they'll often do the long run, and maybe the long run's undulating depending on where you are. But a great thing to put into your sessions is have a dedicated day, ideally every 2 weeks or more frequent, where you're running downhills. You're running downhills and you're getting better at running downhills. And whether that's 1 minute intervals, 2 minute intervals, 400 meter intervals, a kilometer intervals, you'll gradually be able to get better and faster. But start steady, and like anything, start controlled. And it depends obviously where you live. I've always, in Spain, I've got access to 40 kilometers uphill, which obviously means 40 kilometers downhill. In Thailand, I've got access to exactly the same 50 kilometers or 40 kilometers uphill, if not 20 kilometers uphill on my doorstep. Again, 20 kilometers downhill. It's a little bit steeper. So start with start if you can with about 3%, 4% gradient. So it's not too steep. It doesn't feel too much. Obviously, be careful of your knees. Think about your form. Have your biggest mistake is usually overstriding, naturally, because you're going faster, but you've got to stay in control. So your foot is landing under you, you're in control, and start slow. So if you're running uphill, if you're doing an uphill 1 minute and then a downhill 1 minute, great. Like just up and downhill, and then next time you might do 75 seconds uphill, 75 seconds downhill. Have a breather after the second one, but what you're going to learn in the downhill is that you're going to be able to, the heart rate will come down, and it's more to do with skill, and it's more to do with control. So you're coming downhill, again, the form is all over. Don't have the form, especially kind of like rotating the core, don't have that, because any jolts in your body, you're going to really feel those. But what you're essentially doing is you're making the quads more robust. When you've seen a marathon, you've seen people hobbling away from a marathon, it's usually because they're not prepared, and they've not kind of conditioned their quads in order to take that extra load. So when they're hobbling towards the drop bag zone, or they're hobbling downstairs, especially downstairs, it's because the quads have taken a big hit, because they've been using the same muscles over and over and over again in a marathon. In a flat marathon or a flat half marathon, exactly the same. The quads are like, it's too much for them, because first of all, they're smaller muscles compared to the glutes and the hamstrings. The glutes are going to have done loads of work, hopefully. Hamstrings are going to have done loads of work. Calves will have done loads of work. So the calves will be usually a little bit of a mess, but then the quads, they're gonna have, and the way they work is kind of like, it's a shock absorber, it's a brake, so it shouldn't be if your form's flowing, but it always will be, because it's always kind of in that thing, but it's also a push-off. So you've kind of got a brake and a push-off, which is a very weird movement and very, very difficult to replicate in the gym. There's all sorts of like plyometrics and little kind of push-offs you can do with a bar, etc. But there's nothing like actually running downhill that's going to help your quads and help condition your quads, make you robust so you're stronger. If you've not got access to that kind of hill, which most of you won't, you need to use a treadmill. Most treadmills will just go to flat and then incline. There are some treadmills that go to -3, and then there's some really good treadmills that will go to -5, 10, -15, I think as much as -15. But I've been on good treadmills before, and again, it's an efficient session. It won't take much out of your body after a while, so you can fit this in with your interval session and so your interval session Wednesday, your long run on Sunday, for instance, and then have this like I'd have this probably after on a Friday, Saturday, maybe before the long run. Like, so give yourself 2 days, 2 days after the interval session, 2 days before the long run. And then just start off with something simple, like 10 times a minute downhill, and then gradually 10 times 90 seconds, then 10 times 2 minutes, and then just a little bit of rest in between, just to let your quads like have a breather, exactly the same way as if you were weight training. Have a breather and then get back on it. And what's going to happen is you'll find that initially it's quite painful because you're not used to repetitively running downhill. So focus on form, focus on control, focus on where your foot is falling. And more important than ever, this is going to make you a better runner as well, because you'll realize how important style is and how important like landing with your toe, heel, knee, hip is, how important that is, because not doing it that way is going to cause, if you're landing with your toe pointed outwards, it's going to put some pressure on the MCL. Yeah, so you've got to think about things like that. And the same with the quad, same with the hip. Like if they're kind of not aligned and not efficient, you'll notice it. It's exactly the same with running uphill. If you're running uphill and you're running uphill strong, got to engage the glutes, because the big muscles are the only muscles that can take on that load, and therefore you're going to drive, and therefore the arms are getting good. So you can't be messing around uphill because you're going to be so inefficient. You'll be almost running backwards. Yeah, so super important to do that. But over time, and initially it's going to be hard, but this over time, and I'm only talking 2 or 3 weeks into or 2 or 3 sessions into this, you'll start to be able to get to a point where you can do 6 times 5 minute downhill. And what that will mean is you're conditioning your quads so well. It's so important to do. You're conditioning your quads so well that once you get into that final half, that final third of a marathon, especially the further you go, this is going to help you if 1500 meter runner, 5000 meter runner, 10,000 meter runner, half marathon, and especially the longer you go. In ultra marathon running, because you're often off-road and you're kind of going up and down, etc., you're going to have some conditioning naturally from that. If you just climbed a big mountain, you got to the top and you're coming down, and you've got like 5, 6, 7 kilometer descent, then you're going to condition the quads that way. But there are good descenders and bad descenders, and in ultra marathon running or mountain running in general, you'll notice that you got to have some skill in both. You've got to be good at going up, you've got to be good at coming down, and there's a knack is literally kind of, there's a way to do it, there's a skill in doing it, and the better you become at that skill, the better you become at kind of seeing kind of what's in front of you, especially if it's off-road, the better you're going to be. But in road running, in marathon running, that's going to mean that you are able to focus on your run and race your race as opposed to just surviving. You're not going to have that soreness. What it's also going to mean is you will improve your style, because you'll have to improve your style, so everything will be much more aligned, and that will come, it's gradual, but within 4 or 5 weeks gradually that will happen. And what it's also going to mean is when you're doing your long runs, and especially long runs where you've got a dedicated part of marathon pace efforts with inside, you're going to recover from those much faster because your quads are not taking a hit every week. So it's not like Monday, Tuesday after a Sunday long run, you're in bits, because you're not in bits because your quads are able to take that. So it's really, really big, and it's such a small thing to insert, and it's not going to take you that much time, but it's going to have a massive effect. So warm up and make sure you're stretching your quad muscle. Warm up, and then gradually, exactly the same as you warm up for uphill running or flat running, warm up so you're getting your heart rate up there, but realize that it's not going to be, this is more of a skill session. It's not going to be about getting your heart rate up there, because ideally on the downhill, you want to be recovering in a race. You want to be keeping up the pace, but you want to be recovering. It's not about hammering it downhill and trying to get down and smashing the quads. It's about keeping your body together so that once you hit that next part, and there will always be a next part, there's always going to be an uphill or a flat part in that final part of the marathon, you've got your body together and you can push and you can go hard, and it's not about just trying to survive. Good luck with that, because for me, this phrase is used far too much, but for me it was a big game changer, and it's the way a lot of marathon runners prepare for marathon running. Good luck.